The Legend of Zelda is one of gaming's most liked and longest running game series, yet I have never beaten a single one. Join me as we go back and play through all of them, review them, and then rank them on our definitive tier list on what is the best Zelda game ever made. The Legend of Zelda is a game that I picture being incredibly advanced for its time. Being honest, I don't have much experience with classic games outside of like Super Mario Bros, but compared to that game, this game is incredibly impressive. From what appears to be the very first semi-open world in gaming to an early iteration of what I would consider a new game plus, The Legend of Zelda appears to lay the foundation for not just its own series, but for some of gaming's biggest giants as well. While there is a lot of praise to be thrown at this game for all that it does well, and for what it does for the industry as a whole, it must be said that this game is far from perfect. From horrible puzzle design, inconsistent combat, and a world that makes you place a bomb at every single wall on the off chance that what you need is held behind it, this game will test you. This game will punish you if you go into it blind, and there is a high likelihood that it would take days to complete if you were to attempt that. The Legend of Zelda is split up into two different parts, the overworld and the dungeons. The overworld is what you will be exploring on your quest, the land of Hyrule, the halls, the dungeons you seek, and the pieces of the Triforce inside. The overworld is also where the cruelest part of this world is on full display. At the start of the game, you are simply given a sword and that is all. No direction, no guidance, no indication of what is next on your to-do list, nothing. Believe it or not, this issue is simply confined to the overworld as well, as the game's many dungeons actually deal with this navigation and guidance much better than the overworld through the use of certain items and having a working map. I do understand that this freedom to explore and go out at your own pace to discover the plenty of secrets that the overworld stores is part of the charm, but that charm wears thin on me pretty quickly. The overworld does have plenty of places to visit and secrets to find, from items, upgrades, shops, and even a minigame or two. The player definitely is incentivized to explore all that the world holds, but at the same time the world will not meet you halfway, and you must be prepared to either have a guide up with you while you play, or simply be ready to light every tree on fire and blow up every rock. This flaw, or feature in design depending on your perspective, led to me needing to use a guide for the overworld sections, whereas the dungeons were much more player friendly for blind discovery. This problem of exploration does have a solution within the game's manual, but as I am not in possession of a physical copy of this game, a guide will have to do. Moving on to talk some positives of this overworld, as I mentioned already, the game is jam-packed with content, especially for a game that is this old. We have a great sense of progression with collectible items, sword upgrades, and even the unlockable shops, which, if I never found, this game would have never been beaten. You are given a reason to go exploring, as there are many heart containers out in the world as well, with all of the overworld containers being completely optional, only rewarding a player who wants to explore and engage with the game on its terms. This game also comes with some side content, including the quest to open the shops, which is the first instance of a fetch quest or something similar in that kind of design vein. We had a money guessing minigame that I didn't really interact with, but it was cool that it existed all the same. These things to me are what had me enjoying myself while playing the game. Finding a secret or engaging with something that in my head was way ahead of its time really just opened me up to what a fantastic experience this game is. Another thing that blew me away with the overworld was the fact that it contained a fast travel system that is just tucked away in some of the corners of the map that can greatly speed up your journey if you learn how to master these systems. This game feels like it was designed with passion and mastery in mind, as there are many things a player can do to improve their experience with the game, but only if they take the time to actually engage with the game's systems and learn how they work and how they interact with the game. The pure amount of biomes also impressed me, as I was expecting the game to be the same old forest setting over and over again. But no, we got mountains, beaches, and even graveyards, which really just impressed me, as it made it feel like more of a world than I was expecting. You know what else would impress me? If you guys could help me reach 100 subscribers and leaving a like to let me know that you are enjoying the series. One of my least favorite aspects of this game, though, is the combat, which, if I was to describe it in one word, it would be inconsistent. Let's break that down a little. Link can sometimes block, other times he can't. Sometimes he needs a different shield to block. Sometimes it just can't be blocked. Sometimes you have to face an enemy head on to block it. Other times the enemy can't hit you if you are at an angle. That's just me looking at blocking. And yes, I understand skill issue and all of that, but I think there's more to it than a skill issue. I understand that it's an old game as well. Sometimes it's just not apparent why something works the way it does, and that kind of bothers me a little bit. Another pain point for me is actually the game's enemies. There are some enemies in this game that are just outright unfair. The first that comes to mind, and the most painful for me, is the Wizrobes, which were actually the bane of my run. They can just spam hit you for massive damage while also teleporting and also being fast and also being ranged, and all of this just combines into a god awful enemy. See, that's just not a great enemy to be fighting, and the game is full of enemies just like this. I think at a baseline, the combat is actually fine once you get used to it, especially for its time, but it just does not really hold up today, and when you throw it in with horribly designed enemies, it leads to some pretty unfun experiences. The game actually does give you multiple items to help with the combat experience though, and this is something that I do think needs to be praised. This game introduced many of the staple Zelda items that are still used in games to this day. Each item is also best against certain enemies, although again a lot of this is through trial and error and stuff you'll have to figure out yourself, as the game is in no rush to explain it to you. Looking at these items a bit closer, we have the sword, which is your basic sword with 2 tiers of upgrades increasing its damage. When you're at full health, you can also shoot out a magic beam out of the sword, dealing range damage, a very useful ability. The shield is used to block projectiles. The magic shield is used to block a greater number of projectiles. The boomerang can kill small enemies and stun most other enemies for a few seconds. The bow can be used to kill certain enemies with ease and is used in some of the boss fights. The rings can boost your defense and change your tunic's color, and the bombs can be used in both exploration and to deal splash damage to enemies. We also have some miscellaneous items that can be used to help with your traversal or just overworld exploration, but they're not really utilized in combat. There is a decent slate of weapons and items here, and it certainly does leave you with a lot of options for taking certain foes down, but it just doesn't save what is at its core an alright combat system, but with a lot of bullshit factors that are on display as well. There's not much here in terms of the in-game storytelling. I heard there was more that came included with the manual, and even the game's box was used to convey aspects of the story. But as it is now, the in-game storytelling leaves a lot to be desired. There are some NPCs present, but they do not really propel the narrative forward. They are more like mouthpieces to teach the player things, sell them things, or maybe the odd time once or twice to do a small side quest. The dungeon NPCs are more interesting, but only marginally, as they often teach you the boss's weakness or your next move in the overworld, but very little to push the plot along. The main plot is told to you through a scrolling text wall at the very start of the game that explains the broad strokes of the story and why you are going on this adventure to begin with. Then at the very end, you are declared the hero of Hyrule, and that's it. Is it revolutionary? I don't think so. Not even for its time. But does it work as a driving factor to send you off on a quest? Sure. I'm not going to be too harsh on it due to its technical limitations, which are clearly on show, but just don't expect the classic Zelda stories to be on show in this game. Although the game does set up our 3 main characters of the series going forward, which is nice to see. Looking at the music, we have the opening theme and the world theme that are really good, and they lay the groundwork for a lot of the main themes and the vibe that the rest of the series will go on to have, allowing yourself to get really immersed in this triumphant and heroic adventure. The dungeon loop, on the other hand, is short with not a lot to work with. Sure, it does change the vibe to more accurately display the severity of the situation you find yourself in, but all things considered, you spend a lot of time in the dungeons as you play the game, and hearing the same theme over and over when it wasn't great to begin with can lead to it really grating on you at certain stages. There is a unique theme for the final dungeon in Death Mountain, and that definitely does its job in conveying your situation, and I would say I like it marginally more than the regular dungeon theme, but that could just be because I only heard it once over the entire playthrough, whereas every other dungeon has the regular dungeon theme. Overall, for a game series with such great music, I have to be honest and say I am marginally disappointed with how it wound up in this game. I think it's fine for the time, but I can't praise it when I really just don't think it deserves that much praise, especially when you compare it to games that come out today from the same series. Now we're going to get into the meat of what The Legend of Zelda has to offer with the dungeons. And first we're going to look at dungeon number 1. In this dungeon I got the boomerang and the bow. The boomerang was incredibly useful for this early stage of the game as it allowed you to stun the enemies, and the bow did not become useful till quite a bit later, but it did eventually become useful in its own way. The dungeons here done a really good job of introducing the concept of a dungeon to me in this game, with the map being in an open room and compass leading me to the end. The enemies weren't too tough and the puzzles were solvable. It introduced the moving blocks in a very good way, and the final boss of the dungeon was easy to kill, but also a cool boss to look at in comparison to the other enemies. This was a very good starter dungeon. Looking at dungeon number 2, this dungeon had a very weird layout while also introducing me to gear upgrades. I suppose the sword and shield should have been my first clue, but getting a stronger boomerang was just not something I thought this game would have in it. While having some cool stuff like the upgrades, this dungeon was definitely a step down from the first one. I found it easier and the final boss left a lot to be desired. Dungeon 3 was very peculiar in its shape. Besides that, it also marks the point where the dungeons got tougher for me in my playthrough. The shielded enemies gave me a bit of a rough time because of the collision. It took me a little bit to get used to hitting them at the side or the back instead of the front. These enemies actually are a fair challenge, I would say, but sometimes it just feels like they put too many of them in a room all at once. This is also where the game tells you about the sword I found earlier, meaning that some progression can be gotten earlier than I think it was meant to be intended. The boss looked hard to kill, but then the second time I went in, I just placed a bomb and killed it in one shot. I'm not sure if that was intentional, but that is what happened. Dungeon 4 adds a less difficult new enemy in the form of these ghostly versions of what looks like the Duck Hunt dog. When killed, he turns into the bats, and the bats can sometimes sneak in because they are small and fast, and they can get little chip damage off, but they're not too bad. The dungeon also has some relatively cool light-based puzzles where the room will be dark and you have to feel your way around. Just a cool little aspect that the game can do despite the technology. The boss here is a great step up in difficulty, but more so due to its inconsistent hitbox than the actual challenge of the boss. This dungeon also introduces previous bosses returning as mini bosses, which I think is very cool. Dungeon 5 is another major step up in challenge, as up until now most enemies done a heart of damage, if even. Now though, the enemies in here seem to have gotten a damage buff, as they now do upwards of 2 hearts of damage a hit. This dungeon was tough at first, but the more you play, the more you get the hang of it. The enemies become somewhat predictable, leading to a fairly straightforward but not necessarily easy dungeon. The little rat yolks are kind of rough though. I didn't realize this now, but you can actually kill them with a bow in one shot, and I should have done that because it would have made this a lot easier. The boss on the other hand is very simple. He died to the upgraded sword in 2 hits. For a dungeon whose enemies hurt the boss was a serious letdown. Dungeon 6 was again a massive step up in terms of regular enemy difficulty, with these mirrored wizard things that I now know to be wizrobes. They do a ton of damage and cannot effectively be blocked, or so I thought. It turns out my magic shield actually got taken off me by one of the enemies, these little kind of jellyfish looking things, and I didn't realize that up until this dungeon. So they can be blocked if you have the magic shield, but if that magic shield gets taken off you, the wizrobes just beam you to bits. As a matter of fact, I thought this dungeon was by far the worst part of the game up until this point, and I was terrified of the boss. If it was anything like the wizrobes, I would be here for hours. I got to the boss chamber for it to go down in just one measly arrow. Sure, I was delighted to get out of here, but honestly I'm disappointed in that boss fight. Honestly, the only two decent boss fights in this game so far have been the two dragons and that one room of Wizrobes. I hated this dungeon, it just was not very good. Dungeon 7 actually starts out much easier than the past 2 or 3 dungeons, with old enemies showing back up. At this stage we are so strong that we're just one-shotting any of these old enemies that do end up showing up. This dungeon is a hidden wall central maze with so many hidden walls that need to be blown open that it isn't even funny anymore. This dungeon is also where I found bomb upgrades, but I believe you can actually get these earlier, I just missed them somehow. Basically, this just upgrades your max bomb count. This dungeon also gives us the candle upgrade into the red candle, which allows it to be used more than once per screen. The boss of Dungeon 7 was an absolute joke, to be honest, unable to even deal damage, and then getting killed in 2 hits from our sword. The boss in this game have been kind of poor overall, but this one is just laughably bad. At least it was cool to see how much extra damage we did now with all of our upgrades over that original boss. Overall, Dungeon 7 is a massive step down in terms of difficulty following Dungeon 6, but I actually found myself enjoying Dungeon 7 more than Dungeon 6 as the combat and enemies were more enjoyable. Dungeon 8 is the dungeon where I realised something that would have been helpful at the very start of the game, and I'm appalled I didn't even try it. You can use the candles to light up dark rooms to show you what you need to do or where you need to stand, and this was a game changer for me. This was also the dungeon where my enjoyment of the game really started to go downhill into actual anger or annoyance. Sure, the Wizrobes mildly annoyed me, but the room with 4 fireball launchers and 4 to 5 shield boys, the blue ones, the upgraded versions, really pissed me off. The further you go into the dungeon, the more it feels like a boss gauntlet, which I guess is earned in a sense of game progression, but looking at it from a mechanical standpoint, there's just a lot of jank for a boss rush like this to work for me. The shield just feels super inconsistent at this stage, blocking some things with crazy inaccuracy and then letting other things hit me when it looks like they shouldn't. I also found that in this dungeon the little rats are one-shot kills with the bow. Better late than never, I guess, but I could have used this much earlier. The boss was another repeat, but this time the dragon had 4 heads. I found this to be the easiest part of the dungeon yet again, as I could just spam my sword and kill him in a couple of hits. Dungeon 8 was my least favourite part of the game up until this point, and call it a skill issue if you must, but I just did not enjoy what it had to offer me as a player at this stage. Death Mountain is the final dungeon, and the first thing I noticed about Death Mountain is that it contained a unique theme, which did kind of elevate it in my eyes to another level, just in pure presentation senses. Unfortunately, the first room I entered contained Wizrobes, and as you can guess, I did not have a good time. We did get a new mini-boss for the first time in a while with these floating eye skull kind of creatures that like split apart. Very confusing on an initial fight, but once you figure out how to kill them, they go down pretty easily. Funnily enough, there is an item in this dungeon that seems to buff your defenses. I have no idea if there are more of them out there that I missed, but if there is, that is absolutely tragic. This damage resistance also makes enemies like Wizrobes much easier to deal with and much less scary. The final boss also just completely snuck up on me out of nowhere. I was not expecting it at all. I just walked through a door and there he was. The boss himself was a little bit annoying, if I'm being honest. He just kind of stays invisible and you kind of have to guess where he is based on his attack pattern. Once you hit him 4 times, you have to shoot him with the new bow we just unlocked, and that will kill him, winning us the game. Yeah, again, it's another case of the boss being worse than any of the main enemies we have to face in the base dungeon. It's a pity that most of the bosses are letdowns, but alas, what you gotta do. With Ganon slain, we have completed our quest and saved the princess and won the game. The second quest is basically what I would consider a semi-new game plus, consisting of the same overworld map, but greatly increased difficulty, new dungeon locations, shop and item locations, along with a few other tweaks. For a game that came out when this one did, it is awfully impressive the amount of content they managed to cram into this game. As for me, I felt like I had already played the game enough, and maybe someday when I feel like coming back or completing a 100% Zelda challenge, I will take it on, but for now, our quest really is over. Overall, I actually really enjoyed most of my time with The Legend of Zelda. For a game series I haven't really explored much of's first outing, I think they did a fantastic job, especially when you take into consideration the technology of the time. Unfortunately, we aren't really reviewing it in the light of it being a new release, and unfortunately for The Legend of Zelda, it just does not hold up today in a lot of aspects. So while I did enjoy it, the rough combat, lack of story, and just pure flung to the wolves energy this game exerts leaves me no choice but to give it a C ranking, with potential to move down as we play through the rest of the games. With that out of the way, I have to say I really enjoyed my time with this game, and it just leaves me with so much excitement for the rest of the games in this series. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, let me know your thoughts on The Legend of Zelda below, and I will see you guys in the next one.